Good. Thank you. Huzaifa, I tried the farm data list from type of questions,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there are some questions. I think I'll share my screen and then between others joining, I think maybe we'll clarify them if possible. Or if you want to do this at the end, I think we can do that as well.
No, we'll wait for a couple of minutes, right, for people to join. So you can share your screen meanwhile. Go for it.
Oh,
In case we need a longer discussion, then we'll probably do it towards the end. But yeah, let's take a look at it.
it is not needed a long discussion, but again, I'll just it'll be just 2 to 5 minutes maximum.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is the request that I created.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one form. I just put a key one, key two, key three questions,
Mm-hmm.
and I put just a yes questions. And then there is a second form also. It's the same. So yes questions. I use these two forms questions in the as a visibility for other form questions. Yeah.
Ah,
And this is a form 3 where I have a questions. I've used the visibility. I use the other questions answers to show the questions. But again, I'm seeing these questions again from form 1, form 2. But those answers are whatever responses that I put in the previous section or previous steps, I think is not carrying over here.
hmm.
And consider, although it's not carrying over, let me answer this again. Uh, so I'm not seeing these questions as a dynamic.
So
And when I
here you're
go back,
saying the question should be dynamically appearing.
yeah.
Hmm.
And when I go back and come back again, and then I see these questions are visibility if something is coming up. And I'll also show you one more time. I think I'll do this request first, and then I'll go back to backend and show you. Okay.
Hmm.
So
Sure.
so I'll not go issue by issue, but at least I'll just say this, right. So I'll put something in the this thing, and then I'll just submit the request. And And when I submit, I was showing the form which will be which should act as a container, as a display form or at least a summary form for this task. But again, that form should be containing all three forms. But again, I'm not seeing anything here. Yeah, it's just showing me a submit. So I'll go back to the backend now, and I'll show you what I did. Okay.
Hmm.
The first form that I did is okay. Let me go to form. The first form that I've shown you is form 1, which has having question 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yeah. And each of these questions are having a field, map,
Name.
all the field name is all good. And it is not having any assigned to map to pre-populated assigned to map to, just
That's okay.
field.
That's okay.
Uh, so now I'll go to the form 1.1 as a second form.
Hmm.
So this is another form because I want to try with the two forms, not just one form. That's where I think I created two forms. It's all same. It's having a field also. Uh, And now let me go to the container form from our perspective, right? Where you
Hmm.
have these things. I think form 1 is going to have a form 1. Uh, it's having a custom free form 1 list populated, and then form 1 is mapped. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And form 1.1, and I've added a field name also as a 1.1, and then I've added a custom free form list
Hmm.
too, and I put a form 1.1. And form
Correct.
3 is something form 3, but again, we'll come to that form
That's
3. What is
okay.
form 3?
That's okay. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Then I mapped this to 3 and then mapped to form 3. And I'll go to form 2 now, where I was having the questions with the visibility, right? So, oh, not form 2, form 3. Uh, yeah. In the form 3, I have my questions 3.2, 3.5, and then this is a form 1 and 1.1, and which
Hmm.
is the type of a form data list, and then I mapped it to custom free form 1, and then this is a form again I've selected. Yeah.
Hmm.
And now when I use the dependent drop down, or at least the visibility of these questions, I was able to get the option of form 1 and
This
form
is
2, and I
form
was
one and form two. Hmm.
able to do it. Yeah, this is what I did. And then in the request or in the process, if you look at it, this is the process. I have only one review task, and the review task I've added this form 2 meaning form 2 will be having all the three forms, form 1, 2, 3, meaning 1.1 and 3. Yeah, so all three, right? So should be having. I think I just put it as a review form. Okay, and then here I selected form 1, 1.1, and 2 as the input forms, and then this is the form to display. Yeah, that I don't. I just use this as part of a request, but this is something I just use it in a
Display.
process steps. Yeah, and
Correct.
now in the request, if you look at it, step 1, form 1, step 2, form 1.1, and step 3, which will be having form 3, which is having all the questions, and then conditionality, and then
Yeah.
these two. Yeah. But if you look at this, right, the form 1 and 2 are displaying properly, and then form 3 level, I'm as a starting with, I'm seeing these forms with the individual questions, but the answers are not carrying over from the other forms to here. Yeah,
That
that's the
it
one thing.
won't carry forward. That is correct that it won't carry forward because you are not mapping it to any process variable that will help the system bring it from one form into another, right?
Okay. Yeah. So if it is not carrying over, the what is the expectation is to put this forms at the top and then ask people to choose the
No,
questions.
so the use case that you're trying is not the use case for form data list question, basically. You are
Mhm.
putting all of this condition in the, like, this is all still being filled by the requester only. So all of this can be achieved then through your, let's say, conditional questions as well and pre-populate from and map to as well. The form data list question is mainly for when another person or a group, like a supplier for example, needs to fill out a questionnaire, and then based on the internal review and inputs the supplier questionnaire needs to change. So it's not the same user that's going through all three.
Okay. Yeah. So
So the
maybe I
use
should.
case itself is different. Like in this use case, if you want form 1 and form 2 to basically be the anchor points and then use the responses in form 1 and form 1.1, then you'll continue to use pre-populate from and map to because it's all being filled by the requester. You don't need form data list in this scenario.
Yeah. So maybe in this case, right, I think we are missing the basic concept of this. Maybe
We
when
saw
we
the
are
basic
not as,
concept, no? Like
yeah,
from a
maybe as part
supplier
of
standpoint.
yeah, maybe as part of one of the, I think apart from these two sessions that we are having today and tomorrow, maybe if we can set up a 30-minute session and then especially on this and cover one example end to end, that will be more helpful so that we'll understand the gist of this, right? So I think we are able to set up things, but again, not able to use it or maybe at least map the requirement with this functionality. So maybe if we can have it after this sessions are done. Will that be fine?
I will suggest go back to the recording because in that recording we've covered the exact example as well, right? After that, if you have a question, then I can do another call with you for questions. But I will
Yeah,
suggest go through that recording first because that's the exact example with the supplier use case that we've covered. So it will be basically the same thing that I'll be repeating. So rather, I would ask you to go through the recording and then we can connect for questions. Not a problem.
sure. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that. I went through your request as well, but again, yeah, let me go back again and then
Yeah,
recording
and
and yeah,
also like I would say there has to be an actual use case, right? Otherwise, you will keep running around in circles, and it won't make sense. Like for example, right now you had all these forms, but the actual use case is if you're using or asking the requester only to fill out everything, you don't need form data list in this case because it can all be done through pre-populate from and map to.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think that is another thing, right? We need to understand what are the actual use cases for this, and how do we
yeah.
implement this. I think I'll go back to the requirement, at least
Hmm.
the
The
recording,
example
and
that
then
I've covered, yeah. So the example that I covered, right, the supplier use case is exactly the use case that we got from a customer for which we built this feature as well. So that's
oh,
the use case for which we even built this feature. So that's precisely the example. Yeah, that's why I took that example too.
okay, yeah, we'll go back to the recording and then try to come
Yeah,
back if
yeah.
there are any questions.
Yeah, do let me know. Yeah.
And there is one more format, right? Farm data select. What is that? It's the same or what? Anything extra on that?
No, I've not seen that used. I think the form data list questionnaire is what is being used, yeah, as of now by
Okay.
the customer as well. Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we don't have anyone else joining in. So let me start the recording and we can start with, or rather resume with the process side of things, right? So give me 1 second. And let me start recording too.
Recording in progress.
All right, cool. So welcome to day 6 of our Explorer and Navigator training. And once again, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for joining in. Uh, we've covered quite some ground in terms of day 1 to day 5. So we'll do a quick recap of majorly what we covered on day 5, of course. But yeah, largely speaking, we've covered master data as a building block. We've covered forms. Uh, in master data, we looked at how to create custom master data, update existing master data as well. In forms, we've looked at standard forms and custom forms also. We've done practice for both of these. Now we've moved on to process in our last session that we had day 5 on Friday. And in that session, we've covered more in terms of the basics of how to create a process and how to add input forms. That's something that the requester will fill out. And then also go ahead and set up a review task, and we've gone through the settings that are available in the review task, right? So we've not covered all the settings in the review task, but we've covered some of the ones at the start, and we'll go through some of the remaining ones today, and also take a look at the other types of tasks that we have, like review, approval, notification, system tasks, etc. Also focus on task escalation, auto completion of task as well. There's also conditional visibility that we discussed briefly already on day 5. And we also spoke about the assignment of tasks to specific stakeholders. So that's something we've discussed too. And then based on how much time we have at hand, we'll also cover AI agents. Okay. So AI agents will, of course, take more time and need more sessions by itself. But at least the basics is something that I can cover. And then we can go into more details about the AI agent as well. Okay. Um, and then we also want to allocate some time to the process practice scenario. So depending on where we are at today in terms of what we've covered, if I feel that we can take a pause in terms of the learning and then at least give some time to process practice scenario, we'll do that. And then we will come back and resume with whatever is left in the session tomorrow. Okay. And yeah, as we've seen, right, if we need more sessions, if we need more time, definitely that's something that we will plan and schedule on our calendars as well.
Yep.
All right, cool. So let's dive straight into this. I have a few questions before we begin. So just to get again some baseline as well, right? So we looked at forms. In terms of forms, can anyone tell me what's the main purpose that you've taken from pre-populate from and map to? What's the main idea for it?
So whatever user is inputting, or at least whatever the user responds to that question will be assigned to that particular process variable or maybe profile variable, and then if there is a data which is already assigned based on the previous steps, which will be assigned to this question as well. Pre-populate is something that, and then map to is something assign it back if there are changes to the question again to that variable.
Exactly, right? Correct. So basically, you are taking that real-time response from the requester and then mapping it to that process variable, right? And the main benefit of this is that you're able to then use it to drive certain tasks in your process, certain conditions in your request as well, for that matter. So all of that can be done when you have that information stored at a process variable level. Okay, great. Anyone, anything else you'd like to add? Any questions on this before I move on to the next one?
So only pre-populate is something that we are having, no? So that is where I think it will just take the value which is assigned earlier, but it will
Correct.
not assign the new value
Map
to it.
it to the,
Right?
yeah, correct, correct. Okay. The next one is, what would you need to do to design a form that has a section that needs to be conditionally visible? So how would you achieve this? Or is this even achievable within Oro?
At a section level, you can put a condition visibility so that the C option, so that all questions in the section will be controlled with the section level visibility.
Correct. Yeah. So I think Noble also mentioned C as the option. Ravi, you're also right. It's basically, you don't have to do it with all the questions. You can basically just go ahead and mark the section with the conditional visibility, and then all questions within that section will become conditionally applicable. Right. Perfect. Last question for forms. Which form helps you design the help center options on the front door?
Tenant standard form.
Yeah, it's not the full name, but yeah, it's there. Anyone else would like to add to that?
Tenant options config.
Correct. Exactly right. It's the tenant options configuration form that we have as a standard form that we're using to configure these help center options that we have there. Okay, cool.
So on the help
In
center, one question on this, right? So when we
yeah.
configure something for help centers,
Mhm.
can we give a visibility condition for those items that we are configuring for a particular user group, so that I am not showing everything to everybody, just only relevant user group can see that?
No, as of now, that is not there. What you can do is, if let's say you have, so you have a use case for this before I tell you like
Yeah,
how.
I have a use case where
Mhm,
we are configuring a support portal using
mhm,
the help center.
mhm,
So with the SSO, I think anybody who can log in into the system can go to that as support portal. The
mhm.
requirement here is, although we put this link there, so only gateway team and then admin teams should be able to access that, but not anybody else. Because if everybody else is
Mm.
going into there, I think they'll start creating any number of tickets, and then it'll become not easy to maintain, right? So that way we wanted
Okay.
some groups to create tickets there.
Um, okay, great. So directly this is not possible, like where the tile itself can be controlled from a role perspective. What you can do is assign a form, like in that form or the tile that you show, right? What you can do is you give a link to an existing request that's in Oro. Okay. That request will basically have one form, and in that form, you can have multiple questions. And then those questions you can make conditionally visible based on the role that is assigned to the user. So that is some like a workaround that you can use where it's one form and then the link. So let's say if someone uh, should be able to access the portal, they get that particular link to the portal. Someone who should not be able to access that portal, they just get a standard message saying that this is only available to XYZ users. This is not something that will be available to you. So even though it's not ideal, but you can do this.
But if I go with the farm and all this, I think I have to create a request and then it should be tile kind of option, but not from help center, right?
You can hide the tile, no, on the front door side. You don't have to show the tile. You just show it as a. So wait, what I'm referring to is when we go here, you go to help
Uh-huh.
center, and then when you
Okay.
look here, this is the link that you get, right? In this link, you
Ah,
basically
and
put the link of this request. So when I say start new, there is a link that you get, right? You just put a
right.
link to that request. And then
Mhm.
on the front door side, when you publish that request, you hide that tile. So any tile
Makes
that we
sense.
go, yeah, you publish and
I
you just,
understand.
sorry, yeah, hide request, not this one, yeah,
Yeah,
hide request.
understood that. I think what you're saying is don't directly put the link there. Just put a link of a particular request,
Request,
which will have
correct.
a controllability based on the
Form.
access, so that when they click on
Hmm.
this link, it will open the request, and that request will validate the user
Hmm.
role, and if
Hmm.
it is relevant to them, that link will be visible and people can click that. It's a two click versus one click, but at least there is a
Correct.
workaround.
Not ideal, like I say, it's not ideal. But like rather than not having something, so basically what you will be able to do is, I think there is a yeah, there's a condition called as user role, right? So using this user role, you can control the question level visibility. So this you can put like a help text question which shows the portal and the link for it, whereas another question which will just be visible to those that don't have access. So yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I think this is one of the workarounds that we can look at.
Mhm. Okay, cool. So that we've discussed one question, other couple of questions now related to the process itself, right? So some things we've covered in a process standpoint. So processes help you design the requester's experience. Is this true or false?
Requester workflow experience once the request is submitted. I think.
So true or false?
I think this
Yeah,
looks
I think
true.
true.
Okay, Ravi, you're saying
But
true.
if
Hamza,
you,
what did you say?
I said true.
Okay, true. Yeah, Ravi, go on.
but again, just want to understand the requester experience, right? So are you saying requester experience meaning requester forms that he's going to fill, or requester process flow that is going to see after submission? Is it all anything?
It's good that you said that because that's precisely why I put this question, right? It's a trick question. Basically, the exact differentiation that you mentioned there. So requesters experience, if we strictly talk about requesters experience from the sense that what forms they fill, then this should be false because that is
Yeah.
something that you design at a request level, right? If you're saying true, then the logic should be that after the request is submitted, it's still the same process that is going to be triggered, right? So it's in a way the requester's experience because as part of the process, some things may come back to the requester. So if that's the logic, then yeah, this is true, right? Good that we have that bifurcation clear in our minds as well. Any questions on that? What I mentioned right now? Okay,
No.
cool. Super. Now here, how would you route a task to the right stakeholder? Which options are correct?
Functional development. Functional role metrics and
A
user
and B
groups,
definitely, right?
and
A
then
and B
budget approval.
definitely. Okay.
C is dependent on numbers, right? So
The budget approval metrics is a approver, and then that concept is also there, right?
Correct.
So which means using which we can also do the allocation of the tasks for the particular groups.
So final options that are correct are
A, B, C, I guess.
correct. A, B, and C are correct. So all three you can use for a task, and that task can be anything, right? It can be a review task, it can be an approval task. Everything that you see in a process is basically a task. So it can be through functional role matrix, directly via user groups, or via budget approval matrix as well. So all three are correct. Of course, you can't do this via forms. That's the wrong option.
So I'm trying to think about this third option. And I understand first and second, but
Hmm.
oh, as a refresher is third. What budget
How
approval?
third is
Yeah.
correct, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, now that we are in a specific process,
Mhm.
get to the process listing, go to your process. Here, any task that you see here, right? You can either assign it via. So my question was around the assignment aspect, right?
Yeah.
So either via
Mhm.
functional team,
Mhm.
via user groups, or via budget approval matrix.
Okay.
This
Mhm.
is another option that you see here.
Yeah.
Of course, there are many more, but those are the ones that we wanted to focus on.
Okay. Okay.
All right, cool, super. So I think good knowledge check as well, good grounding, and glad to see that you are in sync with what we've covered so far. In practice, definitely helps with that too. So let's continue now with the review task itself. We've already covered this always visible, how you can apply conditional matrix to this. This is where we actually applied the condition that if the project amount is above a certain threshold, with say 250K, for example, then you go ahead and trigger that. If not, then don't. And you can add multiple conditions. You can change the logic operator here as well. So you can just let me add any value and you can change the logic operators here. But that's the same thing that we've also seen in forms, same thing that you'll also see in the process or the request level as well. Okay. Assignment also is something that we've discussed. We've also discussed these reviewer interface settings as well. This was the last setting that we discussed on day 5. We did speak about forms to review. We did speak about review summary form as well. So forms to review is something that comes on the left hand side for the requester or for the reviewer, and review summary form is something that comes on the right hand side for the reviewer, right? And then based on what they need to fill, you can add those specific forms as well. So typically, conceptually, I would say forms to review is something that the requesters have filled out so far, or anyone has added any input before it gets to the procurement team. They would review that information on the left. So if we go back here, let's close this. Let's say this is in review. Yeah, this is triage review, still a review step. On the left, okay, close this. On the left hand side, you can see all these are my forms to review. And on the right hand side, this is the review summary form. Okay, that's how you would configure between these two.
Can you repeat
Editable
that one
in
more time?
so form, yeah, sure. So forms to review is everything that comes on the left hand side that the user needs to review.
Okay.
And a review summary form is everything that comes on the right hand side that the reviewer needs to input. Okay.
Mhm.
So basically, if the requester has filled out 5 different forms and you need the same forms to be vetted by the reviewer again, you can add them as review summary forms as well. There's no stopping you. It's just that it'll make more sense if it's going to come on the left hand side for them to just review it. And then on the right hand side, which is basically your review summary form, you will add the form where you actually need the procurement team to add some input. So like a realistic example would be that based on the inputs from the requester in terms of their demand for intake, does this request need sourcing to be done? Do we need contracting that needs to happen here? Is this something that can be serviced from inventory? I'm just taking a very generic example, right? But that's the logic. Like that's what you'll ask the reviewer to input here. Okay. Similarly, if let's say this was not a procurement review task, but it was something that IT was reviewing or legal was reviewing, then any specific questions that you have for legal or IT to review and fill out, that will it in itself be another form, a custom form that you create, and that form can come up here on the right. And while they can review what's there on the left here under forms to review.
Makes sense.
Okay. And then this edit button we spoke last time is because we are able to either mark all input forms as editable at the top, which will give a blanket yes to all forms being editable. So you'll start seeing all the forms as edit, having that edit option. Or on the other hand, if you don't want all input forms to be editable, then if you scroll down, there's another section called as editable input forms. Using editable input forms also, you can manually select which forms from the one that you ask them to review can be editable. Okay. So if say, for example, there were 4 or 5 forms under forms to review, you'll start seeing all the forms here, right? So if there were 4 or 5 forms that were under review, and you're asking them to only be able to edit 2 or 3 forms, you can go ahead and do that. Right now, if I click on this drop down, I'm only seeing one form. Can you tell me why I'm only seeing one form here?
Because forms to review is selected with only one.
Correct. The reason why I'm seeing only one form under editable is because they can only edit what you're asking them to review from a reviewer perspective. If I increase this, if I say, okay, let's just add another form, I'm just adding a random form right now. The moment I add another form here, you'll see now under editable input form, you'll start seeing that form again. Okay. So basically, whatever they're reviewing, you're asking them to edit. Now, you may ask, then why really just have these two sections different, right? It's just the bifurcation from a user interface perspective, wherein you're giving the option that, or making it very obvious for the reviewer that, hey, if you are editing something here, that's something that the requester has already filled out. But what's here, the requester has had nothing to do with that. So it's a new form that's specifically designed for you, and you're filling that particular form. That's the main bifurcation there. And then from here, they can go ahead and submit that particular task. If they edit something that's being filled by the requester, then in that case, that will be part of the version history. So if you click on version history, here you will start seeing if anything has changed. So if I go back here and something was changed, I don't think here it was. In the last session, we saw when I added or edited something, right, it was slashed out, and then on the top, you were able to see what was edited. So that you can see as part of version history. And we also saw in the review step itself, there is something called as enable review. Uh, Let me scroll up here, this one. So if you remember, we did enable review, and when we changed it, it went back for an additional approval to the request owners. So all of
Yep.
this will be based on forms to review, editable input forms, and review summary form. If you mark one form here, but then you also marked all input forms editable, and this is going to overwrite that editable input form setting. This is the superset, right? In Oro, most things are designed in a manner wherein if there's a superset setting or a super setting that you've enabled, then the underlying settings will anyways be overwritten. Okay. Then you have summary forms also. Summary forms are basically to by default collapse certain forms. So if you don't want, like for example, this triage questionnaire is not something that you want to by default provide in an expanded view, then you can add it as a summary view, and you'll see that form come up like something like this. Okay, and then they can click on it and then show the details or hide the details. So you see how right now I just compressed everything, collapsed everything. So then the specific forms that you put as summary forms, they will also come up here, but they will not be in the expanded view. You can click on it and then it'll expand that particular form. So it's just another way of presenting it to the end user, to the reviewer. There's no change between review forms to review or summary form, except for the difference from a UI perspective, right? Then you have restrict to group. Restrict to group is basically not for routing. This is more of an additional eligibility or access guardrail that you have. So by default, you're already ensuring that this procurement review needs to go to the procurement expert, okay, through functional matrix or whatever task assignment that you're doing. Above and beyond this, if you want to ensure more guardrails, then you can go ahead and do this, that you can say restrict to only a specific group that should be able to view or action this particular task. Okay. So again, this is just an additional guardrail, not something that you will typically use to do the original assignment of the task. Okay.
Okay, so just a use case perspective, if our functional role metrics or maybe any other way that we are assigning this task to individual users or groups,
Mhm.
and if there is a sensitivity of this task where it should be assigned to some of the members in that particular one group or two groups, I think they can choose
Yeah.
those groups here. That if it is assigning by because of some reasons in the or some configurations in the master data,
Hmm.
then it'll block
Correct.
them access because it shouldn't be assigned outside of these groups.
Correct. So, like for example, right. So, if you have assigned it to a group rather than a functional team matrix, and that group has a large number of people, and there is some sort of overlap of members in that group, then you can use to restrict it to a specific group within that group as well, and then you'll have another group that's created, and then you restrict it to that group. So, ideally, your configuration should take care of it, but like I said, it's an additional guardrail that you can enforce as well.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Then we've spoken about review summary form, review instructions is basically what comes up on the front door side. So let me show this. Get taken over. Stuff in tabs. Yeah, so you'll see the review instruction that you've added here. This is the review instruction, blah, blah, blah. This is what the reviewer will see here when they are actioning that task. So just before they start or continue the task, they'll see that instruction at the bottom of the review task itself. So again, this is just to provide additional guidance to the reviewer, anything that you want to call out at this point of time. Then review checklist. This is wherein we can add a checklist. So we were discussing forms and we discussed checklist. If you created a checklist, then that's something that you can add here. We saw three options that the user gets for a checklist as well. Either they tick mark it, they cancel it, or they put it as a follow up for later. So if you need a checklist, then you can add that. Again, it's an additional uh, call out for certain things that the reviewers need to keep in mind while they're going through this particular task, right? In our practice scenario, I've added a scenario wherein we can actually either explore checklist or a custom form as well. We'll get there when we get to the practice scenario.
And one thing that we've observed with the review instructions, right? Once we add an instruction, and then if you want to remove the instructions, instructions are not going away. So those are kind of stuck. I think although it is giving us option to edit and remove it. If you publish and then come back again, the instructions are not going. Publish and come to the form again, and then process again and check. I think instructions. Then we had to delete the task and then add a same task again.
Oh, yeah.
See?
Okay. You raised this as a bug?
No, not raised it. But since we were able to delete and add it, so we didn't. But again, we can raise it.
Yeah, please do, because this is, I think this is sub bug itself, because this should not be the case. Um, I will check once, maybe with incognito mode to see if it's, I don't think it's a cache issue. I think it is a bug. Yeah, yeah, it's probably a bug. Cool. You can add it and then we can pick this up. Okay, so review checklist we discussed. Custom action label we've seen in the previous session, that's the action button that the user sees when they complete it. Instead of a normal submit, they will be able to see this button that you see or the button text that you add. Then we have exception process. Now, exception process is a separate process that can be triggered when the reviewer identifies an exception or a special case. Okay, so this is typically used when a review may branch into another process. So uh, you'll click on this and you'll see bank fraud APIs PT approval. So if I go back to process, sure,
And do
this
we need
is
to create those processes with a different type of process so that it will be visible?
so you'll see process type as approval. That's the bank fraud process that you see. And the other one is PT approval. See, PT approval will also be an approval type of process. So if you have these as approval type of processes, then those will start showing up under your exception process. So this is going to be used, let's say if procurement finds like a, I'm just giving an example for a use case, right? So if procurement finds a high risk supplier and they would like to trigger a supplier risk exception process, then that could be one scenario in which you could use this, right?
So
But yeah.
meaning it's based on their judgment where they just add more steps. Meaning it's a new process. Meaning in that process, if you have more steps, then those more steps will be added to this existing for this request in addition to the existing steps in this process.
Correct. Yes, correct.
Oh.
Then you have
And
re-execute.
the process doesn't need to be linked to the request, right? It's just an individual independent process. Just
Yeah,
that those steps can be linked.
yeah, correct. So that's like it'll have its own steps.
Okay. Okay, makes sense.
Then you also have re-execute conditions. In case any of these parameters have changed. Okay. So these are parameters that you see available here. In case, so depending on which change field should cause this particular review task to run again, then you can go ahead and select those particular fields, and then Oro would check whether any of these fields have changed. And if they have changed, then the process would loop back, and then that particular step would get triggered.
And
So
will it let us do the
Hmm.
once this consider this is the first task, and maybe when I'm at the fifth task that one of the variable is changed, it will start. It will execute the task again, meaning the first task again, which means the steps will go to first step again, and then we have to do a second step again. Or once the first step is done, it will come back to a sixth step, fifth step.
Um, I think it does that when the value is changed. So for whichever step that value gets changed, it will go ahead and re-execute the review task again. Not wait for that end of the process, but rather at that step. So like you mentioned that, right? Like if it's at step 5, then after that the review task gets triggered. Correct?
Yeah. Once the review task is done, will it go to second step again, or just comes back to the step where
No,
it
no,
gets
no.
changed?
It won't come back. It will not follow the same process again. It will then follow the next step that was originally where the re-trigger happened.
Okay, makes sense.
Hmm.
Can we add more custom variables or custom process variables to this list, or just a defined list of variables?
No, this is the like the fixed list of variables that you get here.
Okay, so the reason is maybe consider there are some process variables that I'm using, which are
Mhm.
custom variables. Then if I wanted to see if my custom variables are changing, and if that
Hmm.
is the case, then maybe if I want to trigger that task, maybe it's not possible,
Hmm.
then I'll have to use one of these variables and then
Correct.
track the change. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Then we have semantic step and wait until step completion to start. So semantic step is basically you using this to create like a blocker for parallel tasks, right? So it's used as a combination of semantic step and wait until step completion to start. So what will happen is, let's say there is, let me drag and drop a document collection task. And let's say this document collection task needs to go out to the requesters for now. Okay. And I can set up the document collection task however I want. I can say this is the form that I want to collect from them, and I can present them with some information as well. Okay.
In this case,
Uh,
present meaning will come in the main section, right? And
Correct, correct. Present meaning forms to review. Think of this as forms to review, and collect meaning review summary form.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah.
And this good that you said this, because that's how exactly I will keep going through the other tasks like approval as well. Wherein in approval, you don't really have any information that you collect. So it will not have any review summary form. It will just be you presenting forms to the approver and then that task going forward. But like good document collection here is a good example because you're presenting something which is equivalent to your forms to review in the review task. And then forms to collect is basically a review summary form where you're collecting information from them.
Okay.
Okay. Super. Now going back to that semantic step. So in here, you can say that the semantic step is, let's call it procurement ops review. This semantic step is also coming from a master data. So if I go back here to master data and let's say, yeah, you'll see semantic step here. The steps that you see here in the master data are the ones that you see here. So this is something that you can customize basis your use case. And the name will of course show up there. Let's close this. Name will show up here and we are calling it, let's say, procurement ops review. So you are saying that this step is the procurement ops review step. And you're saying that ideally, because both of these are put in the same step together, the moment the system reaches this point, both tasks should get triggered in parallel, right? So procurement review and doc collection should get triggered in parallel. But now what you can say is that, hey, don't trigger document collection task till the time the procurement review is completed. Okay. Only after procurement review gets completed, then you trigger the document collection task. Okay. So now what you can do is, even though they are parallel tasks, you can say that don't trigger it, wait until step completion to start. So wait until the procurement ops review is completed. So only after the procurement ops review task gets completed, which is this task, only then trigger this particular task. Now, either you can do this here, or you can do this at a later point also in the process where this becomes like a blocker. I would give you like a realistic use case for this, which is, let's assume that you're doing sourcing and contracting through Oro. Okay, for example, and then you built like a sourcing process, contracting process as well. And let's say in sourcing, your final step in that sub process is awarding business to the supplier. And in contracting, the final process is uh, signing the contract. Okay. Now, both of these processes could be something that are run in parallel, where in sourcing also you're negotiating with your suppliers, you're closing your RFP, RFQ, and then you are finalizing on a supplier or shortlisting a supplier. Similarly, in contracting also, you can do redlining with the suppliers, see whether the supplier is agreeing to the terms and conditions of the contract or not, and eventually final step will be signing the contract. So what you can do is, in sourcing step, which is having the final step as awarding business to the supplier, you can put a semantic step there saying that don't trigger the award supplier step till the time the contract is signed. Okay, that way, even though both can be triggered in parallel, both may have their own sub processes or sub tasks that are working in parallel as well, but only trigger the final step, which is the supplier awarding in sourcing, after the contract signing is completed. Okay, so that's how you can go ahead and set up or use semantic step in a use case.
Okay,
Okay,
makes
cool.
sense.
And just going to delete
And
this
can we
one.
use the step from different process as well? Meaning,
Yeah, you
maybe,
can.
maybe in this case, we are having not we are maybe consider there are multiple sub processes here,
Correct.
and in the same process, one process, and one of the
Correct.
step in one of the sub process, I wanted to check if that is done. Then only I think start with this process. Meaning there are two sub processes in the parallel. One sub process is
Correct.
having 5 steps. Another
Hmm.
sub process is having 3 steps. I wanted to wait in the my second sub process. Second task should wait for the fifth step in the first process to complete. Then only it
Correct.
starts. Right, something like that. Some kind of condition
Yeah,
I
yeah,
keep.
yeah. Exactly that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that can be done. Yep. Because
Okay.
typically only then would it make sense,
Right.
right? Yeah. So that
Yeah.
can be done. Yep. Okay. Let me go down. Then you also have deny API and recipe name for deny task. This is basically, so name might not be super clear, but basically it means that this is the API that you choose. Sorry. This is the API that you choose in case you're giving the deny option to the reviewer, right? Typically, review task by default does not have the deny option. They just action it in terms of the input, and then they can proceed to the next step. But there is an ability to give a deny option as well, which is missed it.
I'll skip something.
Yeah, show option to
option.
deny, right? So if you enable this option, then they're basically able to deny that review task as well. And if you do that, then you can configure a deny API. So what needs to happen if, let's say, you need an API call or need to trigger a Wakato recipe, which is something that should happen into outside of Oro, or some automation that needs to be triggered, then you can link it to a deny API recipe, and you can give the recipe name for that deny task as well. Okay. So that's in case you are denying something, then you can have that sort of fallback as to what should happen after the review task is denied. Typically, what will happen is, if you don't set this up and the reviewer denies it, then the request basically just lands in the denied status and it ends there. There is none of the tasks that will follow will get triggered because the request was denied in the review step itself. But if you want to have like a branch or some external action that needs to happen, then you can go ahead and use the deny API.
Okay.
Cool. So review task is clear. I think we've covered the settings here as well. Once you are familiar and comfortable with review tasks, you'll see that a lot of the other tasks become pretty much similar. So like, if you just quickly drag and drop an approval task, right? You'll see this we've already discussed. Conditional matrix works the same way. Assignment works the same way. Let's just for the time being assign it to budget approval matrix. In terms of approver interface, also all the same settings that we've seen and discussed, right? Task on hold, disable, skip task. A lot of this is all going to impact the actions that the approver will be able to see, right? Skip on semantic redo also we discussed, I think here, wherein if even if let's say there is a semantic step that is asking it to be completed, then this task should be skipped on redo because that task was already approved. So in that situation, that also something that we've discussed for review. I think all of these other settings also are the same. Yeah. Main difference here, like I said, an approver does not need to fill out any forms. So it will only be forms presented to the approver. Think of this as the equivalent of forms to review in the review task. And they will only be presented with these forms that you choose here. And then they can action this particular request. And in terms of action, they will see the approve and deny buttons. You can change the label for the action button from here. Okay. Apart from that, summary forms also exactly how it works for the review task. Same for this as well. This also works the same way. Yeah, I think all the other settings also we've discussed.
Yep.
Then you have to-do task. To-do task I've seen used less often, but can be used for a document collection purpose as well. Um, it's more like a task that you would use when it's like an offline activity that needs to happen, right? So if it's not related to your system within either Oro system or an external system, let's say this is a task wherein an offline meeting needs to happen, a discussion needs to happen with some team, some conclusion needs to come from that meeting, you can put it as a to-do task. And then once that task is completed, then you can mark it as done as well. Okay. So more in that sense is when you can use a to-do task. Notice that for all these tasks, right? I think I mentioned this on day 5 that all of these tasks have their own rules which we've gone through, but they also have their own notifications. So you can configure notifications in terms of firstly, when you want to set reminders. By default, if you don't have anything, there won't be any reminders. If you want to turn it off, also you can mention -1. If not, also this blank indicates that there are no reminders. And on top of this, if you want to set up reminders, let's say for 2 days, so when the task is assigned to that approver, and if it's not actioned in 2 days, then within 2 days, or rather after 2 days, they will get a notification. Okay. Now, if you want multiple notifications to be sent, let's say 2 days, then 4 days, or 9 days, etc., whatever number you put here, it'll sequentially keep sending reminders to that user. Okay. Now, one thing to
Just one
keep in
reminder.
mind.
If you put a
Sorry,
two,
go
I
ahead.
think it just send a. If we put two, I think it just send us after second day one time and then it will stop. Right. So if you put a more, I think it will start repeating on those days.
Correct. So when you say 2, then it will just send one reminder after the second day that is not been actioned. If you put in 4, then it's going to send after 2 days, then it's going to send after 4 days, then it's going to send after whatever number you put here, like so.
But again, if I wanted to have this reminder going every alternate days after maybe 5 days onwards, or maybe after a due date something. So is there something possible every day or every 2 days?
No, I don't think we can set like a recurring reminder. Because typically, let's say if the task is not actioned itself, then anyways your process is impacted. But yeah, there is no ability to send like a recurring reminder till the time. So you can add it like say after the first week, second week, third week, and so like so. But yeah, there's no way to set like a recurring reminder till it's done.
Okay. Might be because it is spam people. That's the reason I think it's not available.
Yeah, that also, and mainly I would say process, right? So if let's say you were saying that it's not actioned after say 35 days, which is like a month after that task was assigned, then there's something
Hmm.
wrong and the process itself has no value anymore. Unless
Hmm.
the task is such that you need the task to be open for like 30, 35 days, then fine. Because typically what we've seen is that beyond 2 weeks time, you would actually want to set up task escalation. So this is where for any task, right, review task, approval task, you'll see at the bottom there is something called as task escalation. So if you check this, then you have the ability to escalate that task. So you're saying, okay, if that task is not completed, then you need to escalate it, but escalate it to who? And then in how much time? So if you're saying task, you're reminding up to 2 weeks, but if it's not actioned beyond 2 weeks, and then let's give a buffer of another week, and you're saying, okay, if it's not actioned after 21 days, then you want to escalate it to a specific user, either a group or the requester itself. Okay. So in case, let's say you're saying that, okay, it needs to go to a specific group, let's say someone in procurement, then you can, add a specific admin group here, which has all users that have access to procurement admin role. You can tag it to procurement, for example, like so. This is again, this task being routed then to this group, okay, after 21 days of it not being actioned. This is one bit. The other aspect is you being able to customize the email template for escalation. So then procurement knows you can customize the verbiage here, saying that, hey, this task has come to you because this task was not actioned in X number of days, and now you need to action it. This is one way to approach it, where you can customize the template. Same way you'll see here at the top, you can even customize the email template, the default email template for the first notification that goes out to the approver. You can even customize the reminder email template that goes out for these reminders that you set. And then if above and beyond this, you don't want it even to be an actionable task for procurement, you can also set up a task timeout. So when you check this box here, now this task timeout will only come up if you have set up task escalation. If you switch this off, then there is no task timeout. So if you set up task escalation, you can even say, okay, if there is a task that is being timed out, then you want to either auto approve an escalation, time it out after a certain number of days, or activate a semantic step. Okay, in this case, it's on approval. If I go back to review and let me go back to notifications, scroll down, set up task escalation. For a review task, you're saying, okay, escalate it to a specific group, whoever that group is. That something can be customized. You can escalate it after the number of days we discuss, set up a template for it. Otherwise, it will be a default template. And then you can set up task timeout. You can say that, okay, after X number of days, so after 35 days, auto approve this on escalation. Or if you don't check auto approve, it will simply cancel that request. So if you just have this box checked after 35 days of the task timeout, then it will automatically get cancelled. And again, for that also, you can have an email template. But now in all of this, what's happening is that original requester that raised the request, it's not helping them, right? So that's why you can go ahead, either set up another process that should be triggered, which is like an activate semantic step bit, or you can even set it to auto approve on escalation. Now,
So,
this is not really safe. Sorry, Hamza,
so quick,
question?
quick question, yeah. The email template is, I don't know if anyone asked before, but where are those located? In
Under
form?
forms in notification.
Okay, and we have capability of customizing
Yeah.
template using HTML as well.
Um, Not HTML exactly, but it's a rich text editor.
Okay, it's rich
So
text.
you,
Whatever.
yeah, and I think there is an ability to customize it through HTML as well. Yeah, so show
Yeah,
HTML source, you can add HTML text as well. Yeah.
nice. That's good. Okay, understood.
Mhm.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, no problem. Good that you asked this. This is part, like some of this is part of what your practice scenario is also going to be around. So good, good.
Okay, that's good.
Mhm. So yeah, that was task escalation, right? So that's all
And
happening
in
under
this in
notification.
this step, right? I think we have a semantic step at the end. I think how is it helpful?
So here again, you can say that if it's getting escalated and timed out, do you want to then trigger another step or a sub process after that particular task is timed out? So this is explicitly only something that will get triggered if your task is being timed out.
Okay.
So think of it
And
like, I would like, from a realistic use case perspective, think of it like this. You've set up task escalation, it's done, task has been escalated. But beyond that, if you want to set up a task timeout, so even after 35 days didn't nothing really happened, you are now canceling that task. You're not auto approving because that's not as per your process or compliance. So you can't auto approve it. And realistically, you have a timeout email template, which is fine. That timeout template will go. But then you also want to notify other users. So you can say activate semantic step, and that semantic step can just be like a notification task. And that is a notification that can go out to either procurement, either requesters, etc. And then that can be the semantic step that you have here. So that like just an
But
additional
timeout email is
notification.
going to be just going to a task owner, right?
Correct.
But again, semantic step can help us
Yeah,
send emails to our relevant people.
correct. Yes.
But the semantic step should be in the within the same process.
Within the same process as in
Meaning the step that I'm thinking of activating as a semantic step after timeout for
same
this
process.
should be
Oh, okay, okay, okay. Same process or sub process.
within the same process or sub process. It should be one of the task,
Yeah, yeah.
and it can be anywhere in the process. So it will because with the timeout it
Hmm.
will be cancelled, which means
Hmm.
it will not look at which step it is, but it will just activate that one step.
Correct. Yeah.
But the message that we are having in that step is something should be relevant to this, right? Where or maybe
The
that task will be
notification.
mostly, yeah. If it is a notification, and then we are going with semantic. I think whenever this is timing out, or maybe whenever we are activating with the semantic step, so
Mhm.
it will be just specific to that cases, and then it will be enabled only those cases. We are any other case it will be disabled.
Yeah. So it will be like a combination of your conditional applicability, which is this one, and the semantic step as well.
And how do we configure that conditional applicability based on the other step, which is timing out or something? Is there a way to read that value, or at least?
So say for example, we want to trigger this notification. In that case, you can first say, yeah, you can say wait until step completion, and we can say tag it or rather say hold task until step completion. I would assume that if we're setting up this as procurement, we have this as a step. And if it gets cancelled, so
Which means this task should be invalid until the previous or whatever the linked task is timing out. If it is not timing out going all well, then this task should be hidden by default.
yeah,
Right?
so the reason I paused is because I would want to test this once in terms of whether you would consider it as wait until step completion or hold until step completion. So wait means once that task is completed, then you trigger it. Hold means you don't trigger it till that task is not done or executed, right? So how would the hold work versus the wait is something why I paused. Probably something that I'll need to check in terms of because when the task gets, so if you scroll down here and you're saying not here under notifications, yeah, so when you are timing out a task, right, basically that task is the system considering it as a task that is completed even though it's cancelled. The task got executed, right? Through timeout it got denied. So is the task considered as something that got completed or not completed? Based on how the system reads it is how you'll configure the notification task for the semantic step. Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll have to test how it considers the task timeout. Does it consider it as a completed task or puts it as a task that puts on hold? Because even for that, you may get an option to resubmit or retry. Then that in that case, then this notification task will need to be considered accordingly for semantic step. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we've discussed approval, review, to do. In a way, we've discussed notification as well. But yeah, let's go through notification also. So By default, each task I was mentioning has its own notification section. But if you want to say send out separate notifications, let's say this is a request where after procurement review, now you anticipate that there will be a contract discussion that will be ongoing, and you want to just intimate your legal team about it, right? So you can say, okay, assign this notification to a specific group and assign this to legal. For example, if you have a legal group, I don't have a legal group right now. So I can just put, say, support manager as an example. And then in that case, in notifications itself, you can again decide which forms you want to present to the assignee, which are basically forms that will go out to the user, whoever's part of support manager, as part of the email. Okay. So forms presented to the assignee will be part of that email that goes out to the user. You can have a custom action label. Typically, notification doesn't have a custom action. This custom action label will not make sense. Same way, configure re-execute conditions and set up semantics or hold semantics like we discussed. But yeah, main bit here that you would do for a notification task is actually go to notifications and then set up the template that you want for this particular notification.
And the to and CC is just it's on top of whoever that we are assigning in the rules, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's your custom recipients.
Okay.
So we've looked at this. Let's also cover document collection task. This we briefly discussed as well. Typically, document collection task is used more from a supplier data gathering perspective. So when you have your task, like a document collection task, which you want to assign to suppliers, again, you can assign it based on all the methods that we've discussed, but something that you would want to assign to suppliers. And you want to then ask them to fill out a certain number of forms. Forms presented to assignee would be the forms that they get to view, and forms to collect will be the forms that they are actually filling out information for. You will typically present them more in terms of what you want them to fill out. This is where you'll put in things like your company information form, payment details form. So, company information form is your tax information form, like we've discussed. Payment details V4 form is the form that you will ask them to fill out for bank related information. Then you have supplier contacts V2 form as well. This is where you're asking them to actually fill out any additional contacts that they may have. All three forms that I mentioned so far are standard forms. Okay. But then if you have any specific custom forms that you asked the supplier or you filled out for the supplier, this is where you can add those custom forms as well. And this is actually where that form data list, Ravi, that you were discussing at the start, right? Something like that form data list questionnaire will also be handy here. This is where you can add that. And then based on whatever the reviewers, requesters have filled up till that point, that can have an impact on that form, the custom form that the supplier needs to fill out as well. So when you're testing, when you go back to that video and test again, probably take this document collection task as a scenario wherein you have questions for the supplier, wherein if let's say the risk of that supplier internally between procurement and requester has been assessed as high, then you're asking them some follow-up questions. Whereas if the risk is associated as low, then you're not asking them those questions. So that's something that can be taken as a scenario.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So yeah, forms presented and forms to collect is something that's important. Here also, you'll see visible to supplier available, right? So typically this is where you will check this flag, which is visible to supplier. So they'll be able to see that particular task in the progress section as well, which will be visible to them. Apart from this, you will see that this toggle is available elsewhere also for other tasks. But as a as part of say Goldman Sachs, right? Why would you want to show a specific internal step to the supplier unless it is relevant to the supplier? So if it is, then you will check it. Otherwise, most internal steps that you have will not be shown to the supplier. So by default, that visible to supplier will be unchecked. Okay.
Okay.
Um,
And if this task to be available in the supplier portal, I think we just have to assign it to supplier as assignee, is it?
Correct. Yeah, supplier. And if you are assigning something to the supplier, how will the system know who's the supplier? So in that particular scenario, either your requester or the reviewer will need to fill out that supplier identification V2 form. So
Mhm.
here, typically you need to have that supplier identification V2 form. So let's say we go ahead and let's even add that, right? Supplier identification V2. Because this is like the most basic form where we capture the name and the email ID of the supplier. Based on the email
Mhm.
ID that's entered here, this system will be able to automatically route it to the supplier email ID.
Okay, makes sense. And the visibility supplier is just a progress bar kind of a thing, but just assigning to a supplier is just will apply those
Correct.
tasks, it's visible those tasks to the supplier in the supplier portal.
Correct. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay, so we've assigned two documents that the supplier should fill out. Okay. Also notice that not just for forms to collect, but even for these other tasks like procurement review, for example, there is this always visible available here. This is also the exact same condition builder that we have. So one condition builder aspect is here available at the top for a task, whether this task itself should be applicable or not. And then within that task, the forms that you either present to the reviewer from a view perspective or edit perspective, and then forms that you are asking them to explicitly add information to, all of those forms also can be controlled through condition builder. Okay, it's the same pop-up. Again, you can use based on your conditions whether the form should be shown to the reviewer or not. Okay,
Okay.
so that's condition builder available there. One aspect here I want to also call out is not here, but here. If you're adding a standard form, right? So let's say for editable input form, not editable, sorry, review summary form, I'm adding the supplier identification V2 form. Okay. Now here, whenever you add a standard form, you remember when we were looking at standard forms, let's close this. And let's go to supplier identification V2. Yeah. So when we were looking at standard forms, it's basically a bunch of toggles that you have, right? And then at the end of these toggles, you have all of these fields that you can customize, which fields you need, which fields you don't need. You can mark each field as optional, required, or disabled. So either you do it at a tenant level, which is in the standard form itself, or if you want that form to behave in a certain way just for this particular process that you're building, then you can toggle it from here. So this settings icon, or like more like an equalizer icon that you see, is for your supplier identification V2 form. The entire list of settings that you see here, right, are all available here. The settings along with the fields as well. So if the process that you're creating demands some explicit settings just applicable to this particular form in this process, then this is where you can customize it from. And the
One
same
question on it, right?
settings.
I think if
Hmm,
if, if I need to have some fields available by country, right? Maybe based, I think there is a general requirement, right? For some countries, some fields are mandatory, and some countries, some fields are optional, right? And something like that, right? So maybe how do I enable some fields for some countries but not for other countries? How do I configure that in this case?
can you give me an example of some of these fields so I'll know
Meaning
what to
in this case, the
suggest?
tax related
Hmm,
questions that we are, maybe the fields that we are having, right? Maybe based on country, India country, I think it have some fields valid, and maybe for
hmm,
US based, US and maybe UK, whatever the other countries, I
hmm,
think you'll have a different
correct.
fields should be available. I think as a mandatory or at least optional, right? So how do we
Hmm.
configure?
Um, it's a lot of it is already set up, but you can like at a country level, but you can customize it as well. So, like for example, bank key, IBAN, all of these are master data that you have. So, say for example, based on a certain country, let's say US, for example. I don't know where it found US, but okay. Mm, Okay, let's just take IT for example. Okay, IT assuming it's Italy, right? So for Italy, if let's say the supplier selects Italy as their country, and they are entering information that is the IBAN information. Okay. So IBAN will go through this regex validation and the format validation as well. Okay. You can specify what should be the length of it, and accordingly, the system will check for IBAN validation for that particular country that they've selected and the IBAN that they've entered. Now, this is more in terms of validation. You said more in terms of the fields that are
Yeah.
available as well, right? So I think there is one which is bank country, but this does not have the field validation. I think there is one country master data as well. One second.
So that is one of the standard requirement that we have for phase one. So just trying
Hmm.
to see if
Yeah, no, valid. Yeah, so this country bank is definition V4, right? This is already set up wherein based on the country code, you will have the fields that you need from a domestic standpoint and an international standpoint. So you can put
Oh.
Swift or IBAN that you need, whether you don't need Swift or IBAN. This code that you see under domestic and under international list is coming from another master data which is called as Bankies master data. So let me go back there to master data. Sorry. Yeah, so here you have all the bank key names, right? So again, for Philippines, for example, you have PHRN, and then that's what you will see here for Philippines as well. So if you go PHRN, here you'll see for Philippines as the country, these are the domestic and international fields that will come up. That's the domestic bank key. And then you have Swift and IBAN available as well. So if you don't need IBAN, then you can remove IBAN if you need IBAN for domestic. So there are certain countries I think that also have IBAN at a domestic level. So then this you will need to update. You put a semicolon here and put IBAN, and then it will also give you IBAN at a domestic level. So these permutation combinations, this is something that Oro can help with as well when you're configuring this.
okay.
Okay, cool. We can go back to the SIV2 form that we discussed. And yeah, I was just mentioning that, like how you see it here, right? At a process task level, you have that standard form and you have the settings. We'll see that when we get to requests, right? If you are using the standard form in a request, which means the requester needs to add the input for it, then same way you can even configure it at a request level. So you'll notice that if I have as input two forms, I have added the standard form here, but this is something that the requester will fill out, right? So that's why you don't see the configure or the icon settings icon here. You will see it when you map that form in the request as to when at what stage the requester needs to fill it out. So you can publish this, for example, and when you create a request for it, procurement request, no, not this one. When you have your supplier identification form added, let's go to two, drag and drop it here. That's when you start seeing the settings icon, and this is now at a requester level that you're customizing it. So it'll depend, right? Whether the requester is filling this form out or the reviewers or the approvers or other users in the workflow are filling it out. Based on that, you can customize the form. Okay, so we've looked at notification, doc collection. System task is more in terms of, let me add it here. Let's add here. More in terms of you either calling an internal API, some automations that Oro provides out of the box, or certain actions where you actually need a Vocato recipe to be triggered, right? So this is something that we'll discuss more in detail when we get through the integration side of things. We will, of course, launch the Vocato self-paced learning, and then we'll do an Oro specific integration training as well. But by default, Oro provides some sort of APIs out of the box. Okay. There's a lot available here. I can take one example, which is something like disable request resubmit. Okay. So what you may want to do is, let's say from a process standpoint, the moment the requester submits the request, you can give them the option to resubmit the request till the time procurement is reviewing it. But the moment procurement team has reviewed that particular request and before it gets to supplier, you want to then disable the resubmit option that the requester may have because it's already gone out or it's going to go out to the supplier. So after it's gone out to the supplier, you don't want them to be able to resubmit the request. So what you can do is set up a system task under API dropdown. You can search for it like I did, disable request resubmit. Okay. If you notice, there's also another API called as disable request cancel. So they have two options on the front door side. One is that they can resubmit a request or they can cancel a request. Okay. So if you disable these options, then they will not be able to see these options on the front door after this task has been completed, which is in our case procurement task, and it's triggered this particular API as well. So this is
So
one
if I wanted
example.
to, run request resubmit disable and then cancel disables, right? So I'll have to create a two API task, is it? Two
Correct. Yeah,
system
just
tasks.
right after this, you can even make it like a parallel bit because both you want to trigger at the same time. And here you can say disable request cancel, and then this will disable that as well. And then both of these, you can actually hide them because it's not going to serve any purpose for the requester. So you can hide these tasks and then you can publish your process.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay. These I will cover briefly when I just drag and drop this one more time. So apart from these, there are certain objects that we would create in Oro. When I say objects, think of it like documents in a real use case. Like you would have PO, you would have a supplier, you would have contract, you would have create PR. Now, when we say create PR or when we say create PO, it will create a purchase order in your orders tab. So here, if you click on more, there, if you have purchase orders enabled as a module, then you have a purchase orders tab here as well. Okay. So in that case, once the purchase requisition is completed and it needs to be flipped into a purchase order, that can be done through the create PO task here. Similarly, you will even have it for like a supplier, right? Create vendor. So you'll also have create vendor as a task available. So that will then create the supplier in the suppliers listing page available. So eventually, when you design like a supplier onboarding process and that entire process gets completed, this create vendor task is basically going to be the last task that gets triggered so that the supplier gets created in Oro with a vendor ID as well. Okay. And then the main use case, I would say, apart from the standard APIs that Oro has out of the box, is the invoke recipe, right? So if you want to invoke a recipe, async recipe, or recipe for that matter, you will type the or select that API. And then the main bit that you want to focus on is recipe name. This is the Workato recipe that you will typically set up under settings in the integration tab. So within integration is where you're actually setting up the Workato recipe, and based on that recipe name is what you're actually going to put in your recipe name. Even for the recipe that you have configured in Workato, you will have some input forms and some output forms. So what the system is able to churn in and what it's churning out, right? So for example, if you were to take in all the supplier details that you've gotten so far, and based on the details and the documents that they've uploaded, you want to calculate some sort of risk assessment score, you can use that as an output form as well. Okay.
Will
Yeah,
it
go
present
ahead.
the data to end users, or it just, why do we need output form?
To present the data to the end users.
In this step, is it?
Yeah, in this step. Yep.
But this step is not assigned to anybody, no? So who will see it?
So basically what it will happen is you give it some input form. It'll take that, calculate the result, put it in an output form, right? Now that it's
Okay.
loaded that data in the output form, then in the next step, it could be like a review task where you're saying review risk assessment. And that's when you'll feed the output form as a forms to review.
Yeah, makes sense. I think that's makes sense. And also there is a summary form, no? So why do we need a summary form for recipe? The system does?
Not required. You can load it in the summary form, but basically it's just same forms that you'll have here as part of custom forms that you've created. So you don't need to use it as summary form. It's the same. The use case is the same that we've seen for review, wherein it will load up in a collapsed manner versus an expanded view. So typically
But in
for
the
a
API,
recipe, hmm?
in the system task, I think we don't have the view, right? I think it's just task. It's a in between. Or will it have? I think when this invoke recipe is running, are we saying that requester can see all this information that we are presenting here?
Requester can only see in the progress section that there is a system task that is running. You can view activities for it, but the forms that you're giving as input or output, those won't come up in that progress section, nor will the summary form come. This is more like just information that is going to consume and throw an output here. So even if you are marking it as summary forms, you're not able to view that summary form. It's just, again, think of output form, or rather think of summary forms as another way to get the output from the recipe, and then you show it as a summary form. But again, you can even get it in an output form and then in a later step show it as a summary form, right? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. In other case, you are saying I think output form or summary form both can be same, just that
Yeah,
you can put it that
yeah,
can be readable in the Workato and the recipe side, and they
yeah.
can load the data into those form variables or form questions variables, form fields.
Mhm.
Josefa, is there any documentation available to see this particular set of steps, connecting the APIs, seeing them in form?
So Workato has its own foundation level 1, level 2 learning, and then we'll do an Oro specific training on integration, which will cover all of
Hmm.
these in more detail.
Awesome.
Less this, because this is like pretty basic in terms of input output form and summary form. More
Hmm.
time will be spent on that integration tab in terms of actually what you would do as admins in the integration section.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, but yeah, we will cover. Yep.
100%. That's basically what I'm interested in.
Yeah, we will. Yep. That's why I'm not touching more upon it, because firstly, I'm no integration expert. But yeah, that's basically how and when we will cover the integration aspect as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So we've covered system task. AI agent we've not covered yet. We'll come back to this. I'll quickly cover some of the other tasks. Third party task is no longer valid. So this was originally added, I think, when the UI refreshes for this, I think the third party task will be disabled. So even if you drag and drop it, I don't think, yeah, you'll not be able to add it here. This is no longer valid. Uh, this is all now being managed through your system task itself, because in system task you are no longer able to just kind of limit it or restrict it to internal API calls or automations, but rather you're able to, through invoke and invoke async recipe, you're actually able to call external recipes or Workato recipes that you designed, right? So this third party task is no longer applicable. um, Apart from that, you have collection task. Collection task is something that you would use in a process when the workflow needs to collect information. Now that information can be forms, just could be data that you need. It could be documents from another party. And then you want to create like a related or a child request for that, right? Partly to be completed from that third party instance. But you don't know what needs to be done. So it's not a clear cut next step, but it's more like an open point that at that stage, the request can branch into one or two more different scenarios. Okay, so let's quickly touch upon this. So if I add, let me see if I have a task set up. So let me delete this and let's just bring this to the top for the time being. Okay. Now this I've assigned to the gateway team. Allow task completion with pending sub requests. I'll come back to that. Yeah, I think preferred request is fine. Not something that we're using right now. So I'll just publish this. Okay. And let me see if I can clone a request and get it sent to that stage. This is the SIV2 form that we have. I'm just selecting a random supplier at this point. I can add myself as the contact. And submit. So that's the first task that gets created, which is the tasks itself. Okay. Now we've seen how other tasks like review, etc., look like, right? So this will be like a good way to understand how tasks like that collection task would work. So notice how if you have a collection task enabled for your or configured for your request, let's close some of these and let's go back here. So for a collection task, like I said, it's basically going to be used when in that workflow, it's more of an open-ended scenario. So when it gets sent to gateway team, for example, a gateway team can decide, okay, what do we need to do here? Do we need to start a new request which is related to procurement? Now, typically here, what you would have is if let's say this needs to branch into a sourcing activity, into a contracting activity, into just some risk assessment that you want to launch. So all of that can take place from here. Okay. And those are again requests that you can configure and customize here. And once you click on start new, in this case, let's just say I'm going to launch it as supplier onboarding. Okay. And I'm not adding any additional contact. Let's add one. I think this is mandatory, so I can add this. So my email is mandatory there. But yeah, let's continue. So for this intake request, I've now launched a new request, which is actually for supplier onboarding. I have not designed this request, so I don't know um, what are the forms here. I'm just randomly filling this request right now so that I can show you how this will look like after the request is submitted, right? This can be any request that you have. Okay, fine. Let's continue. Yeah, so this is an entirely different request, has its own process, as you can see, and I'm going to submit this. Once that request is submitted, notice how it starts showing up under related requests. So our request was 817. This is now 818. And that's the supplier onboarding request that we've launched. Okay, that's going to be submitted. And based on the process, that request itself will now have its own process. So let's go back here. If I click on this, it'll open in a new tab. And now that's gone to the first vendor team for review. I think this is a review task, yeah. And then they can action it. Now, while all of this is happening, notice how 2818 is the new request for supplier onboarding, but it is linked to this parent request, which is 2817. So this is the child request or a linked request that you created from the parent request 2817 into 2818. Okay. So in case you want to achieve a scenario wherein you're giving multiple options to the task owners as to where it can branch into, then that's when you will use this particular collection task. Okay. Any
Okay.
questions on
Yeah.
this? Hmm.
No, but again, because we are linking these two tasks or
Mhm.
two requests, can we share the data where the data collection and responses between the processes or requests, or it's all independent?
If you're using it, if it's a pre-populate from and map to, and you're using it as a process variable, I think I'll have to test this, wherein it's the same. You're saying it's the same process variable that you have in request, the parent request versus the child request, right?
Right.
Um, I would say test this once. I'm not sure. I'll also make a note of it and test.
Okay. Yeah, another thing I think you are saying collection task will be available when we wanted to give a multiple options to the task owner. But again, he'll just trigger that request and then he'll start that, but again, the existing request and the remaining steps will still go as it is. No disruption to the existing flow, right?
Yes, provided that that particular task owner, when it gets to this stage, they will need to ensure that this request is completed, or if that request will get completed on its own time and this is not a blocker, then they can mark as complete. But now that this request is not completed, let's say it's in its first step. So when I click on mark as complete, it says, are you sure you want to mark the task as complete? I can mark it as complete. Then this particular task will be completed and it will go on to the next task, which is say procurement review in this case. But essentially, task is completed, but that request that we created does not get completed, right? So if I refresh this request is still pending at this stage. So it depends. That request will be open, but if they mark it as complete, then it can move on to the next stage. So this is probably like think of it like not something as serious as sourcing, but something which is like a parallel document collection task that can happen in the background while we still move on with the procurement review and additional information in this same original process. Yeah.
Okay. Next.
Okay. Now you'll notice also in that same tasks, this step which says allow task completion with pending sub request. So that mark complete, and the reason where we were able to proceed even without completing that sub request was basically because we checked this. If this is as important as sourcing or contracting and that needs to complete, then you can put a blocker by marking this as unchecked.
Okay.
Okay. So that's your collection task. Then you also have sub request and follow up. Sub request is when you're actually branching it into a sub request. Okay. In that particular scenario, if you want to branch that primary request into a sub request, then you can using that particular sub request task. So let's say we go ahead and add a sub request task. Again, I'm just adding it at the top. So let's say in this parent request that you're raising for intake, it needs to then branch, or you need to delegate a chunk of this work into a separate workflow. For example, there is a 3-bit sourcing or sourcing again, and for each sourcing activity, you need a quote from each supplier. So there is one request for supplier A to provide a quote, second request for supplier B to provide a quote, and then another request for supplier C to provide a quote, right? So in that case, you can have like multiple child requests that are triggered from the main sub request or the main request itself. So one thing to keep in mind for sub request is that you need to have a fork type. Okay. Typically, where we've seen this used is so these are all predefined variables based on which you can create a fork from your main request. So, for example, if you are using item fields, okay, typically this is used for item fields when you would have, let's say, a purchase order or a purchase requisition request, and that purchase requisition request needs to be flipped into POs, but based on certain details in that purchase requisition, the system needs to not convert it into a single PO, but it needs to split it into multiple POs, right? So then in that case, what you will say is that for this, think of it like purchase requisition intake process, split it into POs, but split it into multiple POs if any of this is different. So if the vendor is different, currency is different, if multiple contract or ship to locations are different, then go ahead and split this purchase requisition into multiple POs based on these fields. And then in sub request is where you'll actually put in your PO process that you define. Okay. So then in that case, that main request, when it gets, or the PR request, let's say, gets split into a PO request, it gets split into multiple POs rather than creating like a single PO. So this is one use case I would say for sub request. Third party task we've discussed, and then the last one is something that is a follow up task. This is
Can
something.
we select multiple sub requests there, so that, or just one sub request?
Just one sub request. So it'll always get split into. So like if it's a PR and you want to split into a PO, then in that case you will have a defined PO process, right? So the PO process that you choose here is more in line with the process is the same. It's just that based on these parameters, you wanted to split into multiple POs than just one PO. That's the main reason that you would do like a sub request in this case.
So this is a requester process. I think it's a request, no?
Sorry?
Sub request is a request that we are selecting.
Correct. Request process is the same thing, no? Like
Meaning in the request,
each
people has to input the forms in the process. It will have these steps, right?
process also can have a link to, like, your PO process can be a request in itself, wherein there may be some sort of review task or some sort of approval task that, like, even the PO can go through certain steps. So in that case, you would need inputs from reviewers, approvers as well. So it can be a request. May not
Okay.
have a front end facing request like a direct PO creation, but yeah, then in that case, it will just be a process with those tasks. But it can be both, no?
Okay.
Depends on your use case. Yeah.
Okay. And I think one question that I missed in the task section, right? So
Mm,
when we are creating a request
mm,
from this task, I think we were showing some 5 to 6 requests there, no, to choose from, right?
mm.
So is there a way that we can configure them, the top 5 or the relevant 5? Okay, there is a prefer request. Is
Yeah,
there
so
something that
through preferred request, you can select which requests should be shown up as preferred. But I will still check if it's just these that will show up, or you will still be able to, like, these will show up as preferred, but not the only request. So I'll check. I'll make a note of this.
I think there is one in one of the release notes, I think they were saying you can choose something, but again, maybe I don't know which option it is, but it can be made
Correct.
as prefer.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I think there is a way, but I will check in terms of if it's working in the expected fashion or not.
Okay. We were talking about follow-up.
Yeah, I'm just making a note. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, going back to the follow-up task, right? So follow-up task is something that you would use at the typically at the end of a request. So let's say I drag and drop follow-up at the end of this process, right? So this is something that you would use to create, or rather automatically create, a related follow-up request after a certain time delay or after a particular process step is completed. Okay. So again, here for this follow-up, you can say for this, when this task gets triggered, initiate this particular sub request, whichever sub request or sub process that you're triggering at this point. Okay. So if it's, let's say, a support that you're using, a support request that you're initiating, or a feedback request where you're actually collecting information from the user, in those scenarios you can use a follow-up request. So let's say you run this entire intake process. um, Possibly you anticipate that this request should be completed in about 2 to 14 or rather 2 to 4 weeks. And then once it gets completed in about 4 weeks time, you want to then go ahead and launch a follow-up where it's like a feedback that you want to take either from your intake or your requesters, or it's a feedback that you want to take from your suppliers. So you can then say, go ahead and accordingly tag it to that specific request. And that request is where you'll have all of this assignment done. So if it's, let's say, just a feedback form, um, there is a way that you can launch a feedback form directly at the end of the request as well. We'll see that when we discuss requests. But more importantly, you can go ahead and also have an entirely different request that you launch. And that particular request you can decide to launch after, say, 21 days or about, say, 30 days, a month after the final request is or final task is completed. And then it gets to this task, you're saying initiate a follow-up in 30 days. So this request that you linked here will launch after 30 days. And you can even put it as a blocker, like how we spoke about the semantic step, right? We can say wait until a specific step is completed. So either do like a blanket follow-up after X number of days, or link it to a specific task that, okay, only launch this after a specific previous task has been completed, right? So somewhere in here, if there's a task that got completed and you'd want to actually go ahead and launch like a feedback or a poll or a survey, that's a form that you've designed, that can very well be a follow-up task that you create.
But although you put this as a 17th step, and then if I want to launch it after 11th, I can still do it, is it?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't need to follow the sequence in this case.
No, because you're already either triggering it based on number of days or you're triggering it based on a step completion. No, but wait, the sequence will matter because it will not get to that stage, so the counter won't start. No.
Okay, so you're saying then why do I need a step? So because this is the last step,
Correct.
and after meaning after 16, it will wait for 30 days and then it will, this step is launched. Is it right?
Yeah, correct. So this 30 counter will not start when the request has been created and submitted to procurement review, for example. The counter for 30 will start when the system gets here in the process, right?
Yeah. So in
That's
that
why
case,
the
when it
number
is the
of
last
days.
step, when it is the last step, and then it will count for 30 days, and then
Mhm.
it will start this step. But again, when it is a last step, then why do I need to choose a step? Because by the time all the previous steps are done,
You mean this
and
step? You mean this one, right?
right.
Yeah, in that case, you don't need to. These are two options in which you can control how and when it's triggered. So if it's the last step, then anyways, your entire process is completed. So then you will not choose it. This will be more helpful when you actually insert it somewhere in between. And even if, let's say, the previous step gets triggered, but some conditions have not been met for it, then you will not trigger it. So let's say there are two sub processes that you have up there, and then one of the tasks is like a semantic step. That's when this will make more sense.
Okay, which means I was explaining the same thing where two sub processes, and then you are dependent on another sub processes task to trigger this sub process task. In
Yeah,
that case,
works like the
you have to
semantic bit. Yeah, correct. Yep.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the follow-up task that we have. Now, just
And again,
quickly.
when I wanted to have, I think the other thing, right? I think on the follow-up thing. So
Mhm.
if once the request is closed, and if we wanted to follow up on the same request after 1 year or maybe after 6 months, is it something that we can use as a follow-up task or something else that we should be using?
So
Meaning, my
you're
question here
saying,
is,
hmm,
yeah. So consider we did a review. I think we onboarded a vendor and or maybe supplier, and then we wanted to do a review of their risk assessment again after 6 months, or maybe defined
yeah,
number of months, or maybe.
yeah.
So is follow-up task can be helpful in this case, or what will be the? I think
Can
because by
be.
looking at name, I think I'm just thinking if this is, but again, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you can use it. You can have your supplier risk assessment getting triggered after that point of time. So you can put in 365 days after it gets triggered, and then after that you can launch the supplier risk assessment. Yeah, can be done.
But do you think this task will be still in progress until this step is done, or the task
Yeah.
will be complete? This request will be complete,
You mean like the request status itself?
right?
I think the request status will change to completed, but I will double check. Because in that case, if the request is still open, then from a compliance standpoint, like or even reporting standpoint, that's not the bit that you want. You wouldn't want a
Right.
request to not be completed because of follow-up. I will check.
Yeah. So this use case is, I think, request should be showing as a complete,
I
but
would
this hidden
assume it
task
gets
should be looking for a
completed.
360 days.
Yeah, so basically, what I know is that request is going to be marked as completed. And then when this task gets triggered, right, that's when the request will be reopened, right? So the status will change from completed to again it being in progress. But I will double check this behavior. But that's the assumed behavior that I know.
Okay. Makes sense. But do you think the same task will be reopened with the same variables and same responses, the previous responses, or it will open the new task,
No,
new
no,
request?
same task. Same.
Okay.
No,
Same
same
request.
task with the request that you have linked here.
Okay.
Hmm.
So consider I wanted to reopen the same request after 6 months, and then with the same responses that I've entered 6 months back, so that if there are any changes in the responses, then I'll update it so that the reviews will start again. Something like that.
What's your use case for this?
So meaning I've onboarded a supplier with whatever the responses that while I'm onboarding this supplier for the first time after six
Hmm.
months, maybe the responses to the questions can change based on the the usage of the tool or usage of the supplier or
Hmm.
the engagement that we are having with the supplier. Then when I'm resubmitting or maybe when I'm following up on the questions again, if the responses changes, I think they should be showing with, we should show them with the previous responses. And if they change the responses, then risk assessment will be again, will recalculate, right? Whether it's a, earlier it considered as a low risk, and now with the change in responses, if it can be a medium or maybe high, depending on that, I think it should go a different route. Yeah.
Yeah, can be done. There can be multiple ways in which you can achieve this also. Like you can have it such that here you are just launching, let's say 6 months after, you're just launching this as a sub request, but that sub request itself just has a couple of questions where you're asking, have things changed or not? And then based on that, if their response is such, then you can have like another sub request or a collection task or another request that gets triggered if in case something has changed. And if nothing has changed, then that request works as it is. Yeah, that there can be multiple ways in which this can be implemented. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Okay, so just lastly, coming back to AI agent with tool, right? This is not something that we have covered. So just going to quickly touch upon this, and then tomorrow we can again continue with AI agents as well. So there are two tasks: AI agent with tool. AI agent with tool is the one you're supposed to use. This is the initial one that was created, but now whenever you're using AI agents, you'll always, or you should always use it as AI agent with tool. So whenever you're using this, now there is some basic understanding that you need to have with regards to AI agents. Okay. So one is that while creating a process, you can drag and drop an AI agent at some point of time. So let's say before even here, right? Let's say before the procurement review, I'm dragging and dropping it to the as an AI agent tool. Now here you start getting all of these AI agents that are available out of the box that Oro provides. Vendor ops, risk review, invoice validation. So these will have its own benefits, have its own number of steps as well. But let's say I'm not using these AI agents that we already have, but rather we want our own specific use case. That's typically when you would want to build an AI agent. So I'm just saying, I'm just creating and adding a new AI agent. Okay. And as a simple use case right now, I'm saying that the task of this particular AI agent is to summarize what all the requester has filled out and provide it in terms of some sort of overview summary, and also as a risk assessment if it's possible, right? So I can, let's say, delete this supplier onboarding request, delete this as well. So I'm essentially making it the first task that gets triggered after the request has been submitted by the requester. And then based on whatever happens here, I want to then feed that information into the procurement review task. Okay. So in AI agent here, you'll see on the right hand side, you have assigning an AI agent. This is again the same pop-up that we see. But since we said that we don't want to use anything that is like AP fraud, autonomous negotiation, or anything like that, we want to build a very simple use case where we want to create our own input form and output form, and then give instructions to the agent. And then accordingly, it should run before it gets to the procurement review step, right? Now, all of this that we are doing is part of a workflow agent that you're building or a process agent that you're building. Because what's happening here is that this agent that you will build, will it help the requester in any way?
Not in the request, but at least maybe as part of a process, I think process owner or task
Correct.
owner can see it in the subsequent steps if we are showing them.
Exactly, right? So this agent that you would build as part of your process is more like a workflow agent, and it has no bearing on the requester's experience, but it has more to do with how it impacts the process that you have here. Okay. And others that are going to come into the process flow, how will it make their life easier or simpler, or how is it making it more information dense in that case, in which case you would build that AI. So this is one type of agent that you would build as part of process, which we are calling it as a workflow agent. Similarly, if you go to requests and if you take your request to make life easier for the requester, in that case, then you would build like a intake agent or an agent that comes as part of the intake process or any process for that matter, that the requester will go through. So the requester actually goes through filling out all these forms. Here, you can actually go ahead and, let's say, at the time of onboarding or at the time of supplier selection, you scroll down, you will see there's system APIs to be executed, right, at the end of this step. So here you can click on this drop down, and here you can choose AI agents as well. So here you will again choose AI agent with tools. And this time when you're choosing AI agent with tools, this agent that you will build is more in line with the requester's experience. And this is more an agent that will help the requester. So two types of agents. One is the workflow agent that you build, which will be triggered after the request has been submitted based on wherever you place this task in this entire process flow. And the second type of agent would be more like an intake agent, which you're building as part of the requester experience, which will help the requester in terms of either filling out forms, give them suggestions, recommendations, whatever that may be, based on how you design the agent. Okay. Now, because you're creating a workflow agent, because this is a task that's actually launched after the request is submitted, think of this as having more capability to do more intensive work, being able to do more complex calculations or computation as well. Why? Simply because when it's running this particular task, at that point of time, procurement review is not actually sitting and waiting for this task to be completed. They will only be notified once this task is completed and the results of this task are sent or fed into procurement review. Okay, they are not waiting for this task to be completed. So all your heavy work or agentic input that you need from your process should typically be built as a best practice into your AI agent as part of your workflow. And from a requester standpoint, the agent that you build here should typically have more light computation, I would say, which should be such that based on real-time input that you're getting from the requester, it should be able to give that output to the requester and help them in a certain way. Okay. Conceptually, this makes sense. Any questions on this?
No, I think the intention here is because user is going to wait for this prompt
Correct.
to run and then give output, so that we shouldn't run
Yeah.
heavy tasks here. If you run heavy tasks, then user is going to wait, and then that will hamper the user
Experience.
experience. Versus the workflow task or workflow agent is something that's a task level, and then the other task will not start until this is done. So which means nobody is waiting, and
Correct.
only once it is done, it will be assigned to somebody else, which means then people will start looking into it. That way you can run any heavy agentic related prompts here, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There will be few more benefits that you get with workflow task, and then rather than having agentic, which is like in this age part of the workflow, you will
Mm.
not only have input forms, but then you'll also have forms that, let's say, a reviewer fills out, someone else fills out, any system tasks that you run, all of that can be put as part of input to the agent. Whereas if you're running it as part of the request itself, it's limited to all the input forms that you are expecting the requester to fill out. So by nature also, it's limited in the sense that it's more focused on what the requester is filling out and then giving input or value to them as part of the request that they're raising. Okay.
Yeah, one thing that we observed with the request agents, right? The request level agents.
Sure.
So I think it is going to take the responses from the current form,
Mhm.
current step or current page, and then it will translate the output into a next page or next step. But it
Hmm.
will not look at all the previous pages and consolidate and then summarize or do whatever you want and then put it in the next page. It will not do that way, right?
Um, If the variables are there and it's pre-populated and mapped to a process variable, I would think it does do that. Have you tested this for like previous forms where you mapped it to process variables and it's not worked?
Yeah, I think we didn't mention anything about process variables in the prompt that we put. But
Hmm.
again, what we did is I think we just